After being suspended indefinitely by All Elite Wrestling earlier this year, Jeff Hardy is expected to complete rehab soon and resume his in-ring career. Plus, speaking of suspensions, we have the latest on CM Punk, Kenny Omega, and the Young Bucks after being suspended by AEW following their post-AEW All-Out Media Scrum brawl. Plus, Dynamite does big in the ratings this week. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. So let's start off talking about Jeff Hardy. Yes, the latest when it comes to Jeff Hardy and a possible return to AEW, which is somewhat surprising considering how it has been for him the last few months. Now, of course, Jeff Hardy has not been seen on AEW television since June following his DUI arrest, and since that time he has been in rehab to recover from his addiction, or shall we say addictions. However, according to the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, written of course by Dave Meltzer, the wrestling veteran is expected to be out of rehab soon and back inside the squared circle. Now, no time frame was given for exactly when he'll be leaving rehab or when fans can expect to see him wrestle again, but it is a major step towards the former WWE champion making his return to in-ring competition. Now, Hardy's last match took place at the AEW Double or Nothing pay-per-view earlier this year when he and Matt Hardy teamed up to defeat the Young Bucks in tag team action. Hardy, though, was arrested for a third DUI on June 13th, a third DUI in not a long period of time, it must be said as well, and following that, AEW President Tony Khan suspended Hardy from the company without pay because of his actions. The AEW President also made it clear to Jeff Hardy that he could only return to AEW upon successfully completing treatment and maintaining his sobriety, which is what he has been working on ever since. Now, Jeff was referenced on AEW Dynamite this week when his brother challenged Darby Allin to a match, as he spoke about the encounter that Allin and Jeff had in the past. Matt also teased an upcoming return for his brother, saying, quote, "We're getting close to the point where we meet the new Jeff and we figure out his future and what he ends up doing." Now, when it comes to the legal ramification and the legal fallouts of his DUI, that is still up in the air, and what is going to happen there is unclear. As I mentioned, he's facing some pretty serious charges relating to that DUI arrest. Now, Jeff pleaded not guilty to the charge against him, and he has a pre-trial hearing that will be taking place in October in regards to the incident. Now, to those that are saying, how can he plead not guilty? It's very clear he was under the influence. He took a breathalyzer. He failed. The video footage is out there. Clearly, he's under the influence at the time. It was reported at the time that that's merely a kind of a formality situation whereby sometimes they'll put in a not guilty plea merely just to give themselves a bit of time for their lawyers or attorneys to work with the prosecutors for this case and get a better deal for Jeff Hardy or get some kind of plea agreement, which is chances are how this one will go. As I mentioned, the charges that are facing Jeff Hardy at the moment are pretty severe. One of them is a felony count, I believe. I might be wrong there, but because this isn't the first time, as I mentioned, this has been going on for too long, and this is a really interesting story, not because we revel in the misfortune of others, not because we revel in Jeff Hardy's addictions resurfacing, but it's an interesting story because I myself, and I can only speak for myself here, but I myself I felt personally had an interesting reaction to when I heard this story. When I heard Jeff Hardy's expected to be completing rehab and he's expected to be returning to in-ring action soon, my initial reaction was great. I'm glad that Jeff's completing the program. My hope is that this time it will stick, this time it will be better, and this time Jeff Hardy can defeat his demons and come back better than ever. But you also have to live in reality too. And I witnessed myself personally, just think of the last 12 months when it comes to Jeff Hardy, right? The way he exited WWE with the exit through the crowd and leaving during the live event, and that being put down to Jeff Hardy just being crazy, and Jeff Hardy just being Jeff Hardy. He does stuff different. He's a weird kind of guy. He's the charismatic enigma. He does different stuff. Or you can't pin Jeff down, all that kind of stuff. Like that happened, and everyone almost gave him the benefit of the doubt. Yes, people raised an eyebrow. Yes, people said, well, given his history, that's a bit odd. But look, WWE, They drug tested him at the time. It came back negative. I don't know if they did a breathalyzer test. It looks like recently his issue's been with alcohol, not necessarily narcotics. But they did those necessary tests, and they jumped the gun a little bit when it came to Jeff Hardy because they released him. His drug test came back negative, and then they panicked. They went, "Oh, Jeff, do you want to come back?" They offered him a spot in the Hall of Fame. Jeff said no. He's going to AEW. And maybe that whole incident of walking through the crowd was manufactured to get a role in AEW with his brother, a lighter schedule, similar pay. It makes a lot of sense. Okay. But clearly, obviously, the footage is there. His issues were still there in AEW. And I felt uncomfortable sometimes watching Jeff Hardy matches in AEW because he was still doing the same stunts. We know the style of in-ring competition that Jeff Hardy has been doing for well over 2 decades at this point, right? We know what he's been doing. We know what he's put his body through, and we know the pain that he is in on a day-to-day basis because of what he's done to himself throughout the years. So when he went to AEW, it almost felt a bit of a positive because he's only going to be wrestling once or twice a week. That's going to be good for his body. That can extend his career out. That can be good, right? That can be good for Jeff Hardy. But in reality, instead of taking care of himself even more, he said, well, just because I'm wrestling once a week, I can do the crazy stuff again. And he's taking incredible, death-defying stunts against Darby Allin, doing these crazy swanton bombs. I mean, it was craziness. And clearly, Jeff Hardy was in a lot of pain. It was obvious. And you go back and watch that match at All Out, Double or Nothing rather, and something's clearly wrong. I mean, it never came out whether that was the case or not, but go back and watch the match. If you go back and watch the Hardys versus the Young Bucks at Double or Nothing back in May, something's off with Jeff Hardy. Now, people at the time said, oh, we don't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was just having an off night, but something was off about him. And it's no coincidence that just days later, he's pulled over for DUI at the time. Now, granted, people said, well, he had a concussion in that match, and he was knocked a bit loopy. Okay, that's possible too. But did he have a concussion when he walked out to the ring? Because even when he walked out to the ring, he seemed off. He seemed a bit off, plus a concussion, and it's just a recipe for disaster. So my long-winded point here, guys, is that I think it's positive that Jeff Hardy's nearly completed rehab, but I can't look at this and not have an air of caution about it. You can't, and think, don't go back into it too quickly. We have seen at this point, AEW is fine without Jeff Hardy. Absolutely fine. There is no need at this point in time to rush Jeff Hardy back. And I don't know this period of sobriety or this sustained period of time, what that length is for Tony Khan, but it's got to be longer than mandated rehab, in my opinion. Yes, complete rehab, but then stay clean and sober for 3 months. Stay clean and sober for 6 months. And if Jeff Hardy doesn't want to do that, well, that's the contracted terms, or that's the terms I'm given to stay with the company. Because Jeff Hardy, frankly, at this point is running out of options when it comes to big companies. If it doesn't work out with AEW, he can go to Impact, or he can do indie dates, and I'm sure he will. But this is going to be the last big paying company that's going to have him. WWE, they probably feel like they dodged a bullet when it came to all of this Hardy stuff again. So, do I expect Hardy back in the ring anytime soon? The problem is I expect it now. Once I heard the Matt Hardy stuff on Dynamite, once I've heard Matt Hardy tease a new look Jeff Hardy's coming. A new look Jeff Hardy came back, 2020 in WWE, and they actually made light of his addictions. They turned it into a stupid storyline against Sheamus, and he came back, and this is the last big push for me, and it ended the same way it's ended again and again and again. And this isn't... I don't want to come across as being negative here. I want to come across as being realistic. I really hope Jeff Hardy has turned it around. I truly do. But I feel like given the history and given the circumstance of how just completely out of it he was in that video, and he was behind the vehicle of a car, they pulled a gun on him because he was so out of it, and they thought he was reaching into his glove box or he was going to drive off, and it's because he didn't have the car in park. But it was a mess. It was a complete mess. So I feel, myself, my own opinion, that he needs an extended period of time, in my opinion. But it looks like that might not be the case. Of course, if we do get some latest information, we'll talk about it here on the channel. Speaking of suspensions, of course, one of the biggest stories in AEW still is CM Punk, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, the latest status when it comes to their AEW future. And we have a lot of sort of differing stories here that kind of merge into one. So this kind of encompasses the latest when it comes to Omega, the Bucks, CM Punk, the other AEW producers and talent that were suspended for trying to separate the Brawl that are now back within AEW. So Let's start off with Kenny Omega. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we heard about this compulsory talent meeting backstage, and this came actually before all of this madness, and it was about the backstage rumors of tension and heat that CM Punk was a part of Hangman Page and Eddie Kingston and Sammy Guevara and Thunder Rosa and Jamie Hayter and all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of discussion about behind the scenes in AEW. So AEW put together a compulsory talent meeting, and Tony Khan, the AEW president, did the majority of the speaking during the meeting, but the EVPs, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, also addressed the talent at the meeting. However, according to the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, some of the comments that Omega made during that time actually frustrated and annoyed some of the talent on the roster. The former AEW World Champion reportedly gave a pep talk to those in attendance, but that also included some tough love. Omega apparently claimed that 8 out of 10 of the people he wouldn't have hired, which was the line in question that apparently caused the frustration. So when he's addressing the talent, he said, look, 8 out of 10 of you I wouldn't have hired. It's not great for morale, that, Kenny. Now, it was confirmed that he said that line during the meeting, but as is the case with the All Out Brawl, there are differing versions of how Omega said things, did things, and how people took it. Now, as I mentioned, it was confirmed that Omega did say that during the meeting, but one version of events stipulates that he was simply joking in that moment. Omega was looking at Will Ospreay, with whom he has been feuding with online and in the ring during the recent AEW World Trios Championship tournament, but he was apparently just messing with the Englishman, and many laughed about it. However, while some found the comment to be a joke, others took it seriously and were upset about the comment. There was reportedly a split amongst those at the meeting, with some believing it was misinterpreted and then taken out of context, but there were other certain wrestlers that did not like what he had to say. Outside of that comment, Omega did say that the energy of the locker room was more positive when the company first started, which was taken as him trying to recreate that amongst those currently signed with AEW. Now, of course, the recent post-AEW All-Out backstage brawl took place after the meeting, so in terms of the efficacy of it and how effective it was, probably not great. It's led to Omega being suspended by Khan. Another meeting has since taken place after that, this time around with Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho, and Bryan Danielson addressing the talent. Whether or not Omega was joking, I would assume, unless Omega is just completely dropped a stinker there, I can only think that is a joke. It surely has to be a joke. 8 out of 10 of you I wouldn't have hired. You say that at a meeting to raise the morale of talent? I can't imagine it was serious. If it is, Kenny, I don't really know what you want to achieve with that one, but I believe it was probably a joke, and that some people maybe didn't understand his sense of humor. I don't know. But I would suspect it was a joke. Now, when it comes to, as I mentioned, those that were suspended following the fight at All Out, a couple have been brought back to AEW now. We covered this over the course of the last few days. According to Dave Meltzer in the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, Christopher Daniels, Pat Buck, Brandon Cutler, and Michael Nakazawa have all returned to All Elite Wrestling. Of course, that just leaves CM Punk, Ace Steel, Kenny Omega, and the Young Bucks currently still under suspension. The group that has been brought back were all rumored to be involved in breaking up the fight rather than taking part in it, of course. Their return suggests the third-party investigation into the All Out Brawl is making some kind of progress, though it remains to be seen how long it will take before word is released on the status of those still suspended. Most importantly, I guess, CM Punk and Ace Steel, because it would appear they're the ones truly with their employment status really up in the air in terms of a long-term future. Now, when it comes to some of those producers, those coaches, particularly Christopher Daniels and Michael Nakazawa, they're both scheduled to wrestle exhibition matches for the company at the Tokyo Game Show, along with overseas talent that includes Takashita, Chris Brooks, Riho, Makioto, and more. Now, while Omega is also currently in Japan, that trip appears to be a personal one, as his planned promotional work for AEW has actually been put on hold while the investigation continues. Which I guess from Omega's point of view, I mean, how much does that suck? You've worked for months. How long's Fight Forever been in development? At least over a year, right? Nearly 2 years. Or maybe over 2 years this game's been in development for. You work on it. That was really one of your key roles in AEW. It's what he's known for, is gaming as well as pro wrestling. So he works on it. He's going to go to Japan, where he's got such a history and such a long period of time in his career. He's going to go to the Tokyo Game Show to really talk about the game, show it off, build up some buzz, build up some promotion. He can't do it because he's suspended. And that is a crying shame. Obviously, he has himself to blame for that somewhat. But that is really unfortunate. So I guess, as I spoke about the other day, whilst I'm kind of surprised by that, but I did say at the time, and it did kind of stick in my head a little bit, if you're suspended by the company, how can you then do promotion for a game? That doesn't compute. That doesn't work. Either you're suspended or you're not. You can't be half pregnant, right? So, and you can't just be, I'm suspended as a talent, but not as an EVP. If you're suspended, you're suspended. So it would appear that he probably just thought, look, I'm meant to be going out to Japan anyway. If I'm going out to Japan anyway, whether or not I'm promoting the game, I'm going to go out, I'm going to see some people. We've seen him reunite with Kota Ibushi. And that's unfortunate for Kenny Omega. It is. Now, when it comes to some of the backstage reactions to some of the brawl-out suspensions ending, as Fightful call it, Sean Ross Sapp has provided some new details on this as well. So Michael Nakazawa, Pat Buck, and Christopher Daniels and Brandon Cutler, of course, had their suspensions lifted after only 1 week. As mentioned, Pat Buck, a senior AEW producer, was backstage at Dynamite this week, while Daniels and Nakazawa were already on that planned trip to Tokyo, Japan. Obviously, Nakazawa and Cutler are close with Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, respectively, but Fightful haven't heard from any side that anything malicious happened involving any of these formerly suspended parties as of yet. Now, everyone that Fightful spoke to with knowledge of the situation said that they believe the four were suspended preliminary and for precautionary reasons until the situation became more squared away, which is kind of what we spoke about before, hadn't we? That it was just a big precautionary measure. From a legal basis, they wanted to have their bases covered. They didn't want to make any mistakes, and whilst this investigation was ongoing, they could probably tell in the very, very, very early stages, yeah, they had nothing to do with it, we can bring them back. As I mentioned, the more key integral people to this incident, the Bucks, Omega, remain suspended. There's no timetable for their return right now. As I mentioned, Omega already had the planned week off. CM Punk and Ace Steel status are more uncertain, as I previously stated. But, of course, the difference with Punk certainly is that he's sidelined with an injury. And he's going to be out for 8 months anyway with a torn triceps. He's recently undergone surgery. So Punk isn't coming back anytime soon, even if he was allowed to, because he can't compete. As far as Ace Steel, he wasn't at Dynamite this week. We don't know the status of him. And to be honest, the status of Ace Steel could really be a really influential factor when it comes to Punk's future as well. Now, Fightful have heard of a couple of other names that were nearby, but were not suspended. The only implication given to them was that because they weren't physically involved in any capacity, it wasn't needed to suspend them. However, this hasn't been outright confirmed to Fightful. Now, of course, AEW hasn't officially confirmed any of these suspensions publicly or to the media. However, we do know that that is the case. Now, when it comes to promoters who are going to try to get a little bit lucky, shall we say, off of this incident, what happens if a promoter reaches out to CM Punk and says, hey, whilst you're suspended, fancy doing an autograph signing or fancy doing something with us, fancy making some more money on the side? Well, that's going to be quite interesting. According to a report in Dave Meltzer's Wrestling Observer newsletter, the wrestlers are unable to work elsewhere due to their employment status within AEW. Not only are they stars in the ring, but some of them also hold executive vice president positions in Tony Khan's company. This is what Meltzer had to say, quote, talent while on suspension is not allowed to work elsewhere, since as EVPs, all of their outside bookings run through Khan and the office. Punk is a moot point due to the injury, but there are promoters interested in at least one, if not all of them, for major shows, and were told that they aren't available until the suspensions are over. Now, the only way for AEW's wrestlers to work elsewhere, Meltzer added, would be if they didn't work for Khan. Quote, of course, if anyone was to be let go, they could go anywhere they wanted as soon as they were no longer being paid on their contract, he continued. Khan has made a general rule of not letting people go until their contracts have expired, although there have been exceptions for out-of-ring conduct, such as Jimmy Havoc. So basically, there have been promoters sniffing around trying to find out, but they're still under contract to AEW, so they're not going anywhere anytime soon in terms of working outside dates. If they were to get fired, that's a different question. And maybe someone like CM Punk might try and force it through, even if he's suspended for a long period of time. We ultimately don't know. But don't expect Punk or the Bucks or Omega to be doing autograph signings or anything like that anytime soon. Dynamite this week did very well in the ratings. Very, very well. There was some concerns, obviously, that without the likes of CM Punk, the Elite, that Dynamite could struggle in the ratings. Well, that's not the case whatsoever, because WrestleNomics shared viewership information for Wednesday, and the September 14 episode of Dynamite had an average audience of 1.175 million viewers, which is actually up 14% from last week's 1.035 million viewers. So for 2 consecutive weeks, they've been over a million, which they'll be very happy with. Or is it 3 consecutive weeks now, I believe, as well? Again, they'll be very happy with this. Now, the key demographic also played out positively, as Dynamite was watched by an average of 509,000 viewers in that 18 to 49 demo, totaling a 0.39 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. That is up 4% from last Wednesday and is the highest for the program since June 1st. Now, looking at the rankings, Dynamite placed first in cable originals for the evening, putting it 6th for broadcast primetime. Now, oddly enough, this week's episode tied with 1 year ago in terms of total viewership. The September 15, 2021 Dynamite also had a 1.175 million average viewership. However, the demographic is down this week compared to 1 year ago, where it did a 0.44 rating, 11% more than this week's episode. So, I think Dynamite, obviously AEW rather, will be very happy with that. I don't think they would have honestly expected to do that good of a number, right? Really. I think, again, there would have been a lot of concern that with the situation with CM Punk, with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega's absence, what are the numbers going to look like? I don't know if it's a case of, with all that's going on with AEW right now, that morbid curiosity has struck, or maybe it's just a case of they want to see how AEW is going to react. Well, they like what they saw. They like what they saw last week. Last week's show was good. It felt more almost akin to the older Dynamite shows, and maybe they like what they saw this week as well. And they had 2 matches on the show that had big significance, of course, those 2 semi-final matches. And heading into Arthur Ashe Stadium next week for the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite, that's pretty good going as well. So I think they'll be very happy with that. So positive news for once for Tony Khan. So there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news stories. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news in the comment section below. Be sure to smash a like on the like button and be sure to subscribe, bottom right hand corner, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.